Mr. Mills, thank you very much for accepting our invitation. First, I want to start by reinstating Dr. Ashley Durrani as a higher consultant for the Prime Minister, Mr. Barzani, and how this affects the Kurdistan oil and gas sector.
Well, I think obviously Dr. Ashley has been in that position a long time and has really been there since the start of the independent oil industry in the Kurdistan region. And of course, as a new Prime Minister, I think Masroor Barzani is developing his own team, but it's important to have some signs of continuity. Dr. Ashley is a very familiar face. Of course, all the oil companies know him. He's very deeply familiar with the policies and the projects so far. So I don't know whether he'll stay on this advisor role for a short time or a long time. But at least for now, while the new cabinet is in place, it I think gives some continuity and confidence to the companies that they know that they won't expect a big change to the policies for now.
So everybody in Kurdistan region actually is waiting for KRG and Iraqi federal government to finally reach an agreement over oil and budget. In your idea, what are those obstacles and issues in face of those governments?
Well, I think for now there's been a temporary arrangement which has worked quite well, that the federal government is delivering the budget to the Kurdish region, and the Kurdistan region is able to export its oil and earn some revenues from that, and at the same time it's exporting a certain amount of federally controlled oil as well through its own pipelines that couldn't get to Turkey and couldn't get to the market otherwise. So that's cooperative. I think obviously one big issue in this is still the issue of the control of oil, and the federal government I think has been a bit quiet on this issue, but we know for a long time the federal government has maintained that it should have control over all oil sales, including those from the Kurdistan region. So that issue may come back as one the federal government puts forward. And then there's, I think, a certain number of people in federal Iraq who feel that they're delivering a lot of budget to the Kurdistan region, which effectively comes from oil sales from Basra, without having full control over the oil sales from the Kurdistan region. So they feel perhaps they're giving more than their fair share. I think so far Prime Minister Adel Abdul Mahdi has been prepared to continue that for the sake of holding the country together and making sure the Kurdistan region remains stable. But of course he may not be Prime Minister forever, and we need to see if a new government might take a different view on that.
Mr. Mills, regarding those disputes over and inside the Gulf, which after United States sanctioned Iranian oil, so many disputed and rising and so many problems occurring. Do you think that the Kurdistan Ceyhan pipeline can be an alternative for Iraqi government to export some oil via Kurdish pipeline?
Well, it is a very important route, of course, because really Iraq at the moment has no way out to export oil except through the Gulf. And we've seen, as you say, attacks on tankers in the Gulf and drone attacks on pipelines in Saudi Arabia and these kind of things. Not very serious at the moment, but there's always a worry, of course, if there was a bigger conflict that the oil exports through the Gulf could be seriously affected. Now, there is a small amount of federally controlled oil from Iraq going through the Kurdistan region to Ceyhan in Turkey. There could be a lot more. That pipeline has capacity for 1 million barrels per day or more of exports in the Turkish side. If the federal Iraq wants to use more of that, it has to either it has to connect up more of its fields to the Kurdish system, or it has to repair the old pipeline from Kirkuk, which is very badly damaged by ISIS. But yes, if they had I guess more of a partnership with the Kurdistan region and connected more Iraqi fields to that pipeline, they could export more. At the moment, really, they're limited to just exporting from the fields around Kirkuk. So they would have to connect a much bigger pipeline connecting to the fields in the centre of the country or the south.
There are some reports that actually the Iraqi government is trying to build and rebuild the old Kirkuk Ceyhan oil pipeline. How long does think this pipeline will take?
Well, you know, under the previous oil minister, Abdul Jabbar Al-Aibi, he announced there were some contracts for repairing that pipeline. That is, you know, more than a year ago now. I'm not aware of any progress, and there's still a certain amount of danger and insecurity in that area. So I think at the moment we wouldn't expect any progress on restarting that pipeline soon.
Do you think if that pipeline finally after some year be built will affect the importance of Kurdistan-Ceyhan oil pipeline?
Well, look, I think in a way the Baghdad government would like to have a pipeline through its own territory, and with a lot of capacity to carry crude from Kirkuk and other fields. But on the other hand, that route is quite insecure, whereas the route through the Kurdistan region has been very secure. So it's a bit of a balance, I think. And I think for now the difficulty of rebuilding that pipeline, if you remember, even before ISIS, 2014, even before ISIS took control of a lot of territory, that pipeline was attacked many times. So it was vulnerable even really before there was a major problem with ISIS.
Coming back to Kurdistan region, oil sector, especially you want to focus on oil contracts. How do you evaluate as an analyst this type of contracts, whether you evaluate them as a successful contract or just you have another idea?
Well, I think the contracts that Kurdistan has offered, the production sharing contracts, have been very successful in attracting investment. And of course there have been a lot of exploration and some big new fields discovered in the Kurdistan region. Some are producing now. The contracts are, they generally give a fair return to the company, and they still keep most of the profits for the Kurdistan region. So in that sense, there's a good balance. Now I think if some of the new fields, more difficult fields, smaller fields, if they want to develop those, the conditions for the investor may need to be a bit more attractive. I think though the issue for investors in the Kurdish region has been not really the contracts so much. They had two problems really. One was getting paid. They had to wait a very long time to get paid for their oil. Now that's pretty much fixed. The payments are regular and the companies are all getting paid happily now. And the other issue is some companies had a very long time to get their developments approved. So they were waiting and they wanted to expand production, they couldn't get approval and they didn't know why. So I think that is an important area to fix. There are some big possible new developments, oil and gas, which are still waiting on approval, and that needs to go ahead.
So how do you compare the Kurdistan region contract PSCs with Iraqi government contracts, oil contracts? Do you think which one is better?
Well, I think firstly the situation is very different because Kurdistan region was really a new oil area. There were very few discoveries before 2005, and when DNO and Genel and the others first came in, and the southern Iraq was completely different. It had giant fields which have been producing for many years: Rumaila, Zubair, West Qurna, Majnoon fields, so world-class giant fields. So of course Kurdistan region had to offer better terms to investors to get them to take the risk of going into a new area. That said, I think the terms in southern Iraq have been very tough. The investors complain that they're not making much profit, and some companies have walked away, right? So Shell, for example, has basically left all of its oil investments. It's still in gas in southern Iraq, but Shell has left all of the oil fields. Occidental, which was a partner there, an American company, they left. So some of these companies, they found the profits were too low and they've left. I think for encouraging new investment, the federal Iraqi government is thinking of different terms. The fifth bid round that they offered last year, the terms were different, and they don't call them PSC, but the way they work is more like a production sharing contract. And that can work better than trying to repeat the contracts that they have now. Because the federal Iraqi government now, they are looking at smaller fields or more difficult areas or gas fields which require different terms.
So I have a question regarding this Kurdistan region PSC contracts. Do you think that this type of contracts will continue to attracting IOCs and investors, but after a short break. Mr. Mills, I ask about, do you think that more investors and IOCs from now on coming to Kurdistan, and how is this situation and condition for these things to happen?
Well, I think at the moment the production sharing contracts that are in Kurdistan are fine. They're good enough to attract investment. You see, the contracts have different terms. You can easily change some numbers and you can give a little bit more profit to the investor if they have to for a particular field. That's not the problem. I think there is an issue. There needs to be approval of more contracts and more new projects, and that needs to go quicker. I think also there needs to be a balance of what kind of companies come in, because if you look at smaller fields or more risky areas, the very big international oil companies who are not in Kurdistan today, they won't come for those fields. So there needs to be openness to smaller companies. Of course, you want good companies, capable companies that have money and skills, but still they can be smaller companies who are focused on smaller fields that are still interesting and profitable.
Mr. Mills, what about the gas sector in Kurdistan region? Do you think that the gas sector, like oil assets, have been developed enough in Kurdistan region?
So I think for some time there was a hold up in the gas sector in Kurdistan. Now that we're moving to a stage where there'll be some new development of some gas fields that should provide enough gas to meet all of the region's demand. So it should provide enough to provide power for and electricity for the whole Kurdistan region and gas for other uses. The next step will be, okay, can the region export gas? And of course, from 2013, there was an agreement to export gas to Turkey. There's also discussions of possibly exporting gas to Federal Iraq, which has a big shortage of gas and a shortage of electricity. And I think those projects need to move ahead. But it's quite challenging. You know, a lot has changed since 2013. The Turkish market, the gas market, it probably doesn't need as much gas as we thought 6 years ago. It is getting gas from Russia, new gas supplies from Russia, from Azerbaijan, it gets gas from Iran. So it's quite competitive. A deal with Federal Iraq to export gas or electricity there, I think would be very good for both sides.
So why, for example, those fields that must prepare for exporting gas in the future, like Iran, Nabawi and other fields, why are not developed enough in order to be at least draw a map for and design a date for exporting gas? What is the problem there?
Well, it's hard to say what. I think there are several hold-ups. It's hard to say which is the most important. But one party is agreeing the gas sales with Turkey. Turkey has to commit to taking a certain amount of gas. It has to be quite a lot of gas because you have to build a pipeline, which is expensive. But does Turkey need that much gas? That's a question. Because Turkey is now getting supplies from several other countries.
What about Rosneft contract regarding the building a gas pipeline? We already know that Rosneft has announced that they have agreed with KRG to build a gas pipeline.
Yeah.
Do you think that project can start soon?
Yeah, if Rosneft is ready to do that, of course that's an important step forward. But still there needs to be a sales agreement with Turkey because Rosneft won't build a pipeline with no customer at the other end of it. They need to know that they can sell a large amount of gas in Turkey. And of course the Turks have to be ready to connect to that pipeline and take that gas to different parts of the country. So Rosneft agreement is a big step forward, but it's not the only thing that the region needs.
Gas sector in Kurdistan, do you think that maybe more investors to come in the future, for example, to assess, for example, companies like Qamar Energy and smaller company in order to develop gas fields in Kurdistan region? Do you expect that to happen?
I think it's possible, and of course there have already been various discussions about that, but no major company has yet stepped in. I think they will need to see a clear route to gas to Turkey or Federal Iraq or both of those places.
What about coming back again to oil sector? How do you see the production level in Kurdistan region, end of this year, for example, or next year, how the oil companies in Kurdistan region developing and how much money they spend in their fields?
So at the moment, production is about 400,000 barrels per day. It has been rising. So if we look at the Tauka area up near Dahuk, which is developed by DNO, that has increased production quite a bit. They're developing Peshkabir, a new field there. So that's been really helping production. Qamar, which is operated by Car Group, has been increasing production as well. And Atrush, which is operated by Taka, the government company from Abu Dhabi, that has also been increasing. It's a heavy oil field, has been increasing production as well. So those are the main ones that have been gaining, and some smaller fields have added some thousands of barrels in different places. I think it is very important to keep up the momentum of that, because some of these fields are starting to get old, and we saw this, of course, with Tak Tak in the Genels field. Production has fallen a very long way there, so that has affected the overall region's production. Now, at some point, not this year or next year maybe, but at some point these other fields will also get mature. So they need new developments. So fields, Atrush could expand production more. Shaikan with Gulf Keystone could expand more if they can get the financing and if they can get the approval for new phases of development.
What would the refining capacity in Kurdistan region? What do you think about refining capacity and other oil products? How do you see Kurdistan capacity in becoming a hub for oil products?
Yeah, I think at the moment the refining capacity is adequate for the region's needs, and even to provide some for export. Some of the crude from Federal Iraq is going into Kurdish refineries and being processed and then providing products that can go back to Federal Iraq. There's a need to keep upgrading the refineries and produce better quality products, especially at the end of this year there'll be a new rule on fuel oil in using ships. So basically ships will not be able to use high sulfur fuel oil, so that product will have a very low value by the end of this year. Now, a simple refinery makes a lot of fuel oil, so these refineries have to upgrade so they can turn that fuel oil into petrol, diesel, which are more valuable products that will still have a market.
So do you think Kurdistan region can continue, for example, exporting crude oil and fuel oil, other type of, like naphtha, other type of products to the market? Yes, because already in since some years ago, Kurdistan region always exporting some products. Do you think it can keep them exporting the oil products?
Well, they can continue exporting, but the market for heavy fuel oil is going to go down a lot at the end of this year. Federal Iraq produces a lot of heavy fuel oil as well. It's a very low value product, very dirty, and it's going to be very hard to find buyers for that. So it's important to add more equipment to the refineries so they can convert that fuel oil into better products. Yes, you can always sell it, but maybe only at a low price.
So Kurdistan always have been named as a last undiscovered frontier, oil frontier. Do you think that Kurdistan can keep that name and it is as real as people say?
I think it's turned out to be more difficult than a lot of people thought, and partly the geology has been more difficult and more complicated than people thought a few years ago, and partly, of course, the politics and different political problems have made things difficult for companies at times. Now I think the companies that have stayed in Kurdistan and have put time in and invested there, thinking of DNO, Genel, the Pearl Petroleum Consortium, Taka in Atrush. These companies have been there a long time. They're now seeing some rewards. Other companies came and they didn't succeed and they left again. I think the next stage will be needs to be some new companies probably coming in with some new ideas, willing to spend some more money and try more difficult and more risky exploration. There's a good chance I think they will find more gas. So there needs to be a way to sell that gas, whether that's Turkey or Federal Iraq or something else.
So what about your estimation of oil production in Kurdistan, for example, for next year?
Well, I think we can clearly see production would increase from the 400,000, it may be up to 450,000 or so. The challenge, I think, is to keep that increasing in the next few years. There will have to be new developments, and the mature fields will need more investment, and there have to be some development of some new fields. And some of the heavy oil fields, I'm thinking of Atrush and Shaikan particularly, they need a lot more investment. They could produce a lot more, but they need a lot more investment to get there. There's also, of course, the Rosneft blocks. They picked up 5 blocks from companies that didn't succeed there. They want to start production this year. It's been a bit slow. But they'll see. We'll see if Rosneft can make a success of those blocks that other companies didn't succeed with.
Mr. Wills, thank you very much for being with us.